Hey, everybody. I'm Annie Tolkien, and I have a wonderful guest here today, Lorraine from Becoming Rentable, and she's going to tell us a little bit about Becoming Rentable. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and director of Accessible College. I provide college transition support services and preparation for students with physical disabilities and health conditions. And this kind of directly links up to what Lorraine is going to talk about today. So Lorraine, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Lorraine Woodward, and like you, I'm the CEO and founder of our company, Becoming Rentable. We are a listing platform of accessible short-term rental properties here in the United States. We are looking at accessibility in the short-term rental space beyond a wheelchair. So we look for accessible properties in the area of wheelchairs and walkers and vision and hearing and cognitive needs.
So that's like a much broader kind of purview than a lot of other rental companies, like some of the big names that we won't mention that people might know about, because you're kind of zeroing in on some of the other needs that people might have. So what things might people find when they go to your website, or how do you kind of categorize things so that people can figure out what they're looking for and how to find what they're looking for?
Sure. So it started actually with our family. I have muscular dystrophy and use a wheelchair. I have two boys with MD, and traveling was difficult. And so, I mean, even like going to the happiest place on earth, Disney, I would have to, call my husband and say, hey, I need you to hoist me off the toilet or help me in the shower. And, travel with three of us was challenging. And so we ended up building an accessible short-term rental to meet our family's needs. And I was amazed at how many people were enjoying our space. We've had over 300 families. And I would ask them all the time, why are you traveling from Canada or California or Texas to come to North Carolina to our 1,100 square foot property? And I would commonly get, oh, there's nothing else out there like this. And it's like, no, no, no. I know it was challenging for us. There's three of us, but it can't be this difficult. And so as I started exploring it, I was absolutely appalled on how challenging it was, not only to find an accessible property for mobility needs, but how long it took to find an accessible property. So that's when I decided, when I was turning 60, I wanted to do one last hurrah in my career. And I really thought about what brings me joy and happiness and all of those things. And it's like, I love my renters. I love being a part of this experience and making a difference in their lives. So how can we do that? And that's how we got started. And we are a listing platform, so people can submit a property to be listed. And we have a team of, actually, we're at 21 volunteers, which is crazy. We're all volunteers. And so somebody might submit a property, and we go through our 36 filters to see what is accessible. So we'll look at doors, we'll look at the driveways, we'll look at the bathrooms and the bedrooms, and then we identify the needs. So if somebody is looking for an accessible property for themselves who might use a wheelchair, or a family member that uses a walker, or somebody with autism, they go in and they click the filters. Because one of the things that we've learned is what is accessible to me may not be accessible to you. Yeah. And so what I want a wheel under bathroom sink so I can spit my toothpaste, into the bowl. Somebody else is like, I'm fine. I'll just go sideways and I'm good. Yeah. And so this way you get to pick out exactly what your needs are. And we are focused 100% on accessibility and short-term rentals in the United States.
And it's so, the thing that you just brought up, which I think is really important and often lost on people who don't have disabilities, is that, the ADA is a civil rights law, and it has compliance standards related to it. But, we often say, like, the ADA is the floor and not the ceiling. And so like, you could go beyond compliance to make something more universally accessible for someone in whatever context, in college, in housing, and on a vacation. And so it's really cool because a lot of people think like, is it ADA compliant, right? And you're broadening that scope to bring in pieces of accessibility that, generally many people might not be thinking about as, as something being inaccessible. Because a lot of times we think about physical spaces, but you're also looking at neurodiverse people, people with autism spectrum disorders or other types of neurodiversity who might have like a variety of needs. And there is a lot of, differences between people who use different mobility devices or people who have more arm mobility or less arm mobility. So it's really cool that the platform kind of allows users to actually go in and select like, what am I looking for? So they can key in and get a better sense of whether or not that space is going to be able to meet their needs. And I think that's like a huge gap that you filled. So that's amazing.
Thank you. And you brought up a really good point about the ADA, and it's a challenge within the short-term rental industry because a lot of the guidelines do not apply to short-term rental properties. Unless you have a property that has over 5 bedrooms, these restrictions and guidance are not in these private home environments. And so people are like, I don't have to deal with that. Or in their mind, what might be ADA compliant is a grab rail in a bathtub. And it's like, yeah, we're accessible. And so I think the other thing that we are really trying to do is, well, we are trying to change the short-term rental industry. We want the short-term rental industry to look at what it means and how we define accessibility. Again, going beyond the wheelchair. And that's historically and globally, all that's ever been introduced is the wheelchair. The other thing that I feel personally that it's important is education, creating awareness, because, and that's how I connected with you, is the whole education aspect. But if we are not taught that 1 + 1 is 2, how do we know that? So if you don't have a disability yourself or a family member or a friend, how do you know and understand the value and the importance of accessibility and what it means? So the education component for us is really extremely important. And that's how we're going to create the change. And we're trying to really expand our reach in education so that more people can have that aha moment. Oh, I get it. And for example, this was really exciting. We have a company that we're working with, and it takes time. I mean, that's the other thing. We've been working with Find Rentals. They're a subscription-based short-term rental platform with almost 30,000 properties. And they've used the word handicapped throughout everything. And they just, as in January this month, now have accessible. They've gotten rid of that. We have another company out of Colorado that we're working with who used to say wheelchair bound. And they were like, we'll never say that again. I explained, what, the preferred language is. I talk about people first language, but education is so important in how we create change.
Yeah, and those concepts of like changing from the ground up, right? So it's about educating people, and it's also about maybe educating architects, right?
Yeah.
It just got me thinking too about like bringing in these concepts of universal design. And it occurred to me too, as you were talking, in terms of like the people who might be using your website, right? It might be families with disabilities, whether it's parents or youngsters who have different disabilities, but also people, the aging population who might not associate themselves as having a disability per se. But, we know like that, people with disabilities are the largest minority group in the United States. And so it seems to me that this would be like a net benefit for so many different, portions of the population, right?
It really is. I mean, when we're looking at 26% of the United States population, or a billion people around the world. And the fact of the matter is we all are aging, so we can all benefit. But the educational part, we recently had, actually, I had a renter and her father-in-law needed an accessible property. He uses a walker, and she spent months trying to find a property and found us through a Google search. And she said, I didn't know accessible properties could be on a second floor. because our rental property is on the second floor. We happen to have an elevator. And she's like, I didn't look at any properties that it didn't occur to me that he could get into a property. And she said, I don't know what to look for and what his needs are. I don't live in the same state and don't see him all the time. And he's just like, I need something accessible. And so again, that level of accessibility, a lot of people don't know. And that's why we reach out to groups and team up with partners about explaining this and the importance. And we're working on some new written material. And I'm looking at all the words, and I keep coming back to education. And what's interesting is how we met, in that I have two boys, 25 and 27. And when for one of our, well, actually both of our kids, they wanted to go to school out of state, and looking at properties on these college tours can be really challenging for folks. And so it was interesting because some of our team members wanted to put accessible vacation rentals. And it's like, it's not just about vacation. I mean, we can work remotely. And then we have our families who are taking their kids to doctor's appointments, to educational, schools for educational purposes. We're just starting to look at adaptive sports programs because, again, we've got these events taking place. And in fact, one of my favorite stories earlier is I got a call from a wheelchair curling group. And they said, Lorraine, could you please help us find accessible properties? Because we have to forfeit our matches because there's not enough accessible rooms in these communities that we meet. And it's like, no, this is wrong. This is not right. Our curlers need to curl.
Yeah, curlers for access.
That's right.
Yeah, I mean, you raise like a great point. And I think that like a lot of people don't think about all the activities that people might be traveling to, right? So whether it's like going and engaging in the college search process, and if it's the guardian, the parent, or the student who needs an accessible space for whatever reason, like we mentioned before, there's a variety of needs that people might have. But it can be really hard because, I think anybody who's on Twitter and follows #disability Twitter knows that there's a lot of variety in accessible hotels. And oftentimes people will be placed in a room where they can't actually get into the tub, or, or something else, or the bed is, super, super high, so they can't get themselves up onto the bed. And people document these things on Instagram and on Twitter. So
Well, I can relate because I'm going through that right now. I have a travel experience coming up very soon into the West Coast. And they said, okay, the client is providing the accommodations. And it's like, here is your hotel, accessible hotel room. And I need a Hoyer lift. It's a platform bed. The mattress is 30 feet tall. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't think my Hoyer lift will go that high. The bathroom is 3 feet by 3 feet with a door. Now, I got a wide wheelchair here. But my 25-year-old says, Mom, don't worry about it. You're only going to be gone for 4 days. You don't need a shower for 4 days. But I need to sleep, So it's really interesting as we look at this, again, what makes an accessible room. For some people, this is going to be a beautifully accessible space. For me, I've got a few issues: sleeping, bathing, toileting.
Right. I mean, and it got me thinking too, this is a little bit outside of the scope of rental properties, but when students go and live on a college campus in a dormitory, they encounter many of the same challenges that people who are visiting hotels and need accessible spaces encounter. So, typically universities follow ADA compliance standards because they have to, because they receive federal funding. But, like you and I just said, like, there are a variety of needs. So the students I work with, I have some students who don't have the hand mobility to be able to push the blue push button to get into their residence hall. And a lot of universities have been forward thinking in giving students like garage button clickers or proximity sensors so that automatic doors open. And sometimes that's a request that I'll work with a student and I'll say, you know, if we know this isn't going to work with you and you really want to go to this university, you should ask them if they would be willing to do that for you, to install those things. Generally, I always think that any university that is bringing in a community member, if the community member is bringing a reasonable concern and they have an access concern related to their condition, it's low hanging fruit as far as I'm concerned.
But you know what?
the
That's
change.
that's why your skills are so important, because my youngest went to a college that was an accessible room, and the door was literally like 23 inches wide. Mom
Mhm.
could never go through. To get into the bathroom was a lip like this, and it was a bathtub. And then there was a stall for the toilet that you could barely fit through. And that was their accessible room. And it was very unfortunate. It was very unfortunate because did not end up in a positive year of his college experience.
Mhm.
Fortunately, he's at a place now and getting ready to graduate. It's been on the dean's list. Mama's very proud.
Yeah.
But I so wish that you were a part of our life. I'm glad you are now, because I want to tell everybody about this, because this is important. I mean, this is life-changing. It's hard enough at times having a disability. And then you add to that the whole college life. And then you add to the college life that is not meeting needs or looking at your request in a respectful way.
Yeah.
And that's what we want to try to eliminate. We have that in the short-term rental space. And how can we create these changes so the experiences are positive?
Yeah, I mean, and that is so essential and wonderful. And I am so glad that we got introduced because now it's, some of the families that I work with are maybe exploring schools in, in more remote locations, more rural locations, just, different, everybody, most students I work with, just like any other student, start with like, what am I interested in, right? And does that school have the major? Does it have the Big Ten football team that I want, or whatever the thing is, right?
Mhm.
And so, it doesn't necessarily mean that students, who use wheelchairs are being channeled to one or two institutions. They're looking at all of the institutions just like any other student. Same with students who have chronic health conditions. Maybe they want a great writing program or a liberal arts experience or whatever the thing is. And so there might be some needs for some different types of housing that might not be available in the hotel sector near that institution. But now, with becoming rentable on the board, that's another option for people to kind of look at and see if there are some spaces nearby to some of those colleges where they can, go and check out the school and have like an accessible experience in
We hope
in
so.
rental.
We have over 1,100 properties. We have such a way to go. We're in 655 cities, which
Mhm.
is exciting. But if you amortize 1,100 over 50 states, there are some states that just have a few. So,
Yep.
I encourage people to go to becomingrentable.com and, look at our properties. If you know of an accessible property, let us know. It's a free listing. It's all about getting this information out and providing this information for folks. And we do a 3-person evaluation in any property that comes in, so that we know and we can validate thoroughly that what you see is accessible, because that's a challenge on most, if not all, the platforms right now, except
Yeah.
us.
Yay. Well,
Yay.
I'm glad that we could have this chat so people can check out Becoming Rentable at becomingrentable.com.
Yes.
And are you also on social media?
Oh, absolutely. You can check us out on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. So we're trying to make the rounds and getting our information out. So thank you very much for having me and chatting with me today.
Thanks. I really enjoyed it. And go check out becomingrentable.com.